What kind of faith sustains a woman who loses her husband, is imprisoned for defending justice, miraculously escapes, and then becomes an empress, only to dedicate her life to serving God and those most in need? The story of Saint Adelaide of Italy reveals how divine providence transforms life's bitterest trials into instruments of sanctification. Born in the 10th century, a time of profound political and spiritual upheaval, Adelaide not only survived the storms of her time, but became a beacon of hope for all of Europe. Her life teaches us that true nobility does not reside in earthly titles, but in unwavering fidelity to Christ and in ardent charity toward our neighbor. Chapter 1. A Princess in Turbulent Times. Adelaide was born around the year 931 in the Kingdom of Burgundy, into one of the most distinguished families in Europe. Her father, Rudolph II, King of Upper Burgundy, and her mother, Bertha of Swabia, belonged to lineages that had defended the Christian faith for generations. From the cradle, the young princess was educated in the principles of the gospel and in the virtues that adorned the great saints of the Church. In those days, Europe was going through times of fragmentation and violence, where Christian kingdoms struggled to maintain unity in the face of invasions and internal disputes. The Burgundian court, although marked by the political tensions of the time, was also a center of Christian life, where divine offices and prayer occupied a central place. Adelaide grew up listening to the Holy Scriptures, participating in Holy Mass, and learning from her mother the value of mercy towards the poor. Chronicles of the time mention that from childhood she showed a natural inclination towards contemplation and an extraordinary compassion for those who suffered. Her training included not only the arts befitting a princess, but also a deep knowledge of Catholic doctrine and the history of the holy martyrs. The world into which Adelaide opened her eyes was heir to the ancient Carolingian Empire, which had fragmented into various kingdoms. The Catholic Church represented the only bond of true unity among Christian peoples, and noble families like hers understood that their mission included the protection of the faith and support for ecclesiastical institutions. In this context, Adelaide learned from an early age that her position of privilege was also a responsibility before God and before the weakest members of society. The death of her father, when she was still very young, marked Adelaide's first encounter with pain and uncertainty. However, the spiritual strength that she had cultivated through prayer and the sacraments allowed her to face this loss. With a maturity that surprised those who knew her, her mother Bertha became her main guide, transmitting to her the importance of maintaining hope, even in the midst of tribulations. These early lessons of faith would be fundamental for the trials that the future held for her. Adelaide's formative years transpired in an atmosphere where the temporal and the spiritual were constantly intertwined. Political decisions were made after prayer. Alliances were sealed in the presence of bishops and abbots, and justice was administered according to Christian principles. This comprehensive vision of life, where everything was ordered towards God, was deeply engraved in the heart of the young princess. When the time came to consider her marriage, Adelaide already understood that any union she entered into should be at the service of the common good and the glory of God. Chapter 2. The First Marriage and Early Widowhood. In the year 947, when Adelaide was barely 16 years old, her marriage to Lothair II, King of Italy, was celebrated. This union had been carefully agreed upon, for both political and dynastic reasons, seeking to strengthen the ties between Burgundy and Italy. Lothair was the son of Hugh of Arles and belonged to a family that ruled the Italian peninsula in times of great instability. For Adelaide, this marriage meant not only becoming queen, but also assuming responsibilities that would test her character and her faith. The young bride approached her new role with the seriousness and devotion that she had learned in her home. Life at the Italian court presented challenges very different from those Adelaide had known in Burgundy. Italy was a territory coveted by various feudal lords who constantly conspired to increase their power. Amid these intrigues, Adelaide and Lothair attempted to govern with justice, favoring the church and protecting the weak. Historical accounts indicate that the Queen distinguished herself by her piety and by her genuine concern for those most in need. She established charitable works, visited the sick, and ensured that an atmosphere of prayer and recollection reigned in the palace. The marriage of Adelaide and Lothair, although brief, was marked by mutual affection and the shared desire to serve their subjects according to the divine commandments. Together they promoted the construction and restoration of churches, supported monasteries, and sought to administer justice with equity. However, the shadows of others' ambition loomed over their kingdom. Berengar II, Margrave of Ivrea, had set his sights on the Italian throne and was secretly plotting to seize power. The threat grew day by day. Although the young sovereigns trusted in Providence, in the year 950, barely 3 years after her marriage, a tragedy shook Adelaide's life. King Lothair II died suddenly, in circumstances that many chroniclers considered suspicious. Although it was never definitively proven, rumors circulated that he had been poisoned by order of Berengar, who longed to seize the kingdom. For Adelaide, who was barely 19 years old, this loss was devastating. She found herself a widow, without male heirs who could claim the throne, and surrounded by enemies who saw in her helplessness an opportunity for their own ends. The pain of widowhood was intensified by the immediate threat posed by Berengar. Adelaide knew that her position was extremely vulnerable and that she had to act with supernatural prudence. Instead of being overcome by despair, she intensified her life of prayer, seeking in the sacraments the strength necessary to face what was to come. The young widowed queen took refuge in the certainty that God does not abandon those who trust in him, even if the road seems dark. This unwavering confidence would be tested in ways that she did not yet imagine, but that would reveal the depth of her holiness and her absolute dependence on divine grace. Chapter 3. Imprisoned for her faith. Following the death of Lothair II, Berengar II immediately declared himself King of Italy, solidifying through force what he had plotted in secret. To legitimize his usurpation and eliminate any threat to his power, he demanded that Adelaide marry his son, Adalberto. This proposal was more of an imposition than a request, and Berengar knew that by controlling the widow of the previous king, he could silence any opposition to his rule. However, Adelaide immediately understood that accepting such a union would mean betraying the memory of her husband and, more importantly, becoming an accomplice to injustice and tyranny. Adelaide's response was firm and courageous. She categorically rejected the marriage proposal. This refusal enraged Berengar, who did not expect such resistance from a young, seemingly defenseless widow. Adelaide's decision was not born of stubbornness or pride, but from her deep conviction that she must remain faithful to Christian principles, even if it cost her everything. She knew that yielding to Berengar would mean renouncing her dignity and collaborating with someone who had seized the throne through trickery and possibly through murder. Her Catholic conscience would not allow such a compromise. The usurper's revenge was swift. Berengar ordered Adelaide's arrest and imprisoned her in Garda Castle, a fortress located on the shores of Lake Garda. The conditions of her captivity were deliberately harsh, designed to break her will and force her to reconsider her refusal. Adelaide was stripped of her royal garments, treated with cruelty, and subjected to privations meant to humiliate and weaken her. The objective was clear. If she could not be subdued by persuasion, suffering would make her yield. During the long months of imprisonment, Adelaide found her only solace and strength in prayer. Medieval chronicles relate that she spent entire hours in communion with God, reciting the psalms she had memorized since childhood. and offering her suffering in union with the passion of Christ. Far from breaking her spirit, the tribulations purified her soul and deepened her trust in divine providence. Adelaide understood that she was living her own Calvary, and that just as Christ did not surrender to his executioners, she should not yield to injustice either. Her cell was transformed into a place of mystical encounter with the Lord. The situation seemed desperate from any human perspective. Adelaide was completely isolated, with no apparent allies, and at the mercy of a ruthless enemy. However, the young queen's faith did not waver. She knew that God hears the cry of the oppressed, and that no prayer goes unanswered, even if the divine paths are mysterious. In the midst of her captivity, Adelaide experienced a supernatural peace that baffled her jailers. This serenity in the face of suffering was an eloquent testimony that her hope was not placed in human resources, but in the one who can open all doors and free the captives. Divine providence, in effect, was already preparing her liberation in an unexpected way. Chapter 4. Providential Liberation. While Adelaide remained a prisoner in Garda Castle, her fame for virtue and her unjust captivity reached the ears of compassionate people who could not remain indifferent to such an outrage. Among those who were moved was a priest named Martin, chaplain of the very castle where the Queen was imprisoned. This man of God, moved by divine grace and by the testimony of holiness he saw in Adelaide, decided to risk his own life to help her escape. Providence was beginning to weave the threads of liberation through humble but determined instruments. One night in 951, Father Martin put his audacious plan into action. Taking advantage of his knowledge of the castle's passages and the trust he enjoyed among the guards, he managed to reach Adelaide's cell. With the utmost caution, he explained that he had found an escape route through underground tunnels that led to the lake. The proposal was risky and required courage, as any mistake could cost both of them their lives. Adelaide, who had spent months praying for her liberation, recognized in that opportunity the answer to her supplications. Without hesitation, she trusted the priest and prepared for the escape. The escape was an odyssey full of dangers. Guided by Father Martin, Adelaide traversed dark and narrow passages, descending into the depths of the fortress. Each step required absolute silence. Each moment brought with it the risk of being discovered. Finally, they reached an exit that opened onto the lake. There, a small boat awaited them, which the priest had prepared in advance. Under the cloak of night, they sailed across the waters to reach a safe place on the opposite shore. Adelaide, exhausted but full of gratitude, offered a prayer of thanksgiving to God for having delivered her from the clutches of her oppressors. However, physical freedom did not yet mean complete safety. Adelaide knew that Berengar would send soldiers to look for her as soon as he discovered her escape. She needed to find powerful and quick protection. Father Martin led her to Canossa, where Albert Atto reigned, an Italian nobleman who had opposed Berengar's usurpation. Albert received Adelaide with honor and offered her his protection, moved by her courage and the injustice she had suffered. In Canossa, the widowed queen finally found a refuge where she could regain strength and plan her next steps. From her refuge, Adelaide sent messengers requesting help from the one who at that time represented the strongest power in Europe, Otto Fay, King of Germany and future Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Otto was known for his Catholic piety and his commitment to justice. When he learned the story of Adelaide, her unjust persecution, and her courageous resistance, the German king decided to intervene, not only for political reasons, but also moved by admiration for that woman who had preferred captivity to complicity with tyranny. Providence thus prepared a new chapter in Adelaide's life, one that would lead her to play a fundamental role in the history of Europe and the Church. Chapter 5. Empress of the Holy Roman Empire. In the year 951, Otto I crossed the Alps with his army to respond to Adelaide's call and restore order in Italy. The meeting between them marked the beginning of a relationship that would transform the destiny of Europe. Otto was deeply impressed, not only by Adelaide's beauty and nobility, but above all by her spiritual strength, her wisdom, and her unwavering Catholic faith. For her part, Adelaide recognized in the German king a true defender of the church and a ruler committed to justice. A few months after her liberation, in December of 951, the marriage between them was celebrated in the city of Pavia, uniting the destinies of Germany and Italy. The union of Adelaide and Otto transcended the merely political, becoming a true Christian partnership in governance. Both shared a deeply Catholic vision of temporal power. Rulers were stewards of the authority that God entrusted to them, and they had to exercise it with justice, mercy, and respect for the church. Adelaide brought to this union her refined education, her experience in the Italian court, and above all, her deep inner life. She became her husband's advisor in matters of state, but also his prayer partner, and his inspiration for the charitable works they undertook together. The culmination of this collaboration came in the year 962, when Pope John XIII crowned Otto as Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Adelaide was simultaneously crowned as Empress, becoming the first woman to hold this title in the revival of the Carolingian Empire. This imperial coronation was not only a political act, but a sacrament of Christian monarchy. Otto and Adelaide assumed the solemn commitment to protect the church, defend the Catholic faith, and govern according to evangelical principles. For Adelaide, this moment represented the confirmation that God had transformed her past sufferings into instruments for a greater good. As Empress, Adelaide displayed tireless activity in service of the common good. She accompanied her husband on his travels throughout the empire, visiting the different regions and strengthening the bonds of unity among the Christian peoples. Her civilizing and maternal presence left a profound mark wherever she went. She was especially concerned about the situation of women, children, and the most vulnerable in society. The chronicles mention that she constantly interceded with the emperor to temper justice with mercy, achieving the pardon of many condemned prisoners and the mitigation of excessive punishments. The marriage of Adelaide and Otto was blessed with several children, including the future Emperor Otto II. The Empress dedicated herself diligently to the Christian education of her descendants, transmitting to them not only the knowledge necessary to govern, but above all, love for God and a sense of duty towards their subjects. Adelaide understood that the true greatness of a dynasty did not lie in its territorial conquests, but in its fidelity to Christ and in its service to the Church. Under her influence, the imperial court became a center of Christian life, where liturgy, charity, and the cultivation of virtues flourished. The figure of Adelaide as Empress remained etched in the memory of Europe as a model of a strong, wise, and deeply holy woman. Chapter 6. Mother, Queen, and Reformer. Motherhood occupied a central place in the life of Saint Adelaide, who conceived this vocation as an extension of her service to God and to the Church. Together with Otto I, she had 5 children, and her fundamental concern was to form them in the Catholic faith and prepare them for the responsibilities that awaited them. The Empress did not delegate the education of her descendants to others, but actively participated in their religious and moral instruction. She taught them the Holy Scriptures, led them to Holy Mass daily, and instilled in them love for the poor through the concrete example of her works of mercy. Parallel to her family duties, Adelaide became an enthusiastic promoter of monastic life and ecclesiastical reform. The 10th century was a time of decadence in many religious institutions, where corruption and worldliness had penetrated some monasteries and dioceses. Aware that the renewal of society depended on the sanctity of the clergy and religious, Adelaide dedicated great efforts to founding and restoring monasteries according to the original spirit of the monastic rules. She established close ties with the great reformers of her time, especially with the monks of Cluny, who promoted a return to the strict observance of the rule of Saint Benedict. The foundation of the Celles Monastery in Alsace represents one of Adelaide's most significant works. This Benedictine abbey, established around the year 991, was conceived as a beacon of contemplative life and as a center of spiritual radiation for the entire region. Adelaide generously endowed the monastery, ensuring that the monks could dedicate themselves fully to prayer, study, and manual labor without material worries. In addition, she established that continuous prayers be offered in cells for the peace of the empire and for the conversion of sinners. This monastery eventually became the place where the Holy Empress would find her eternal rest. Adelaide's charity towards the poor reached legendary dimensions. It was not simply a matter of occasional alms, but a systematic and personal commitment to the most needy. She established hostels for pilgrims, hospitals for the sick, and orphanages for abandoned children. She personally visited lepers, whom medieval society completely marginalized, and served them with her own hands. The chronicles relate that she often took off her own garments to give them to those who needed them, and that she devoted a large part of her personal resources to works of mercy. For Adelaide, each poor person was Christ himself knocking on her door. Her influence on evangelization was also remarkable. Adelaide actively supported the missions that brought the gospel to the Slavic territories that still remained pagan. She understood that the expansion of Christianity should not be done by force of arms, but through the testimony of charity and the convincing preaching of the truth. She promoted the formation of missionary priests, financially supported their travels, and constantly prayed for the success of their apostolic endeavors. Thanks in part to her support, thousands of people in the lands of Eastern Europe received baptism and were incorporated into the Catholic Church. Adelaide's vision transcended the borders of her time. She dreamed of a completely Christian Europe, united in faith and charity, where the peace of Christ reigned over all peoples. Chapter 7. The Trials of Regency. The death of Emperor Otto I in the year 973 plunged Saint Adelaide of Italy into profound grief, but it also thrust her into new responsibilities. Her son, Otto II, barely 18 years old, inherited the imperial throne amidst complex political circumstances. Adelaide, with her experience and wisdom gained over more than 20 years alongside her late husband, naturally assumed a role as advisor and guide for the young emperor. However, this transition wouldn't be as harmonious as she hoped. The new emperor had married Theophanou, a Byzantine princess of strong character, and with her own ideas about how the empire should be governed. Tensions between Adelaide and her daughter-in-law, Theophanou, quickly surfaced. Both women possessed remarkable intelligence and deep devotion to their respective visions of imperial governance. But their approaches differed significantly. Theophanou represented the Byzantine tradition, more centralized and ceremonial, while Adelaide embodied the Germanic Italian spirit, with greater emphasis on collaboration with the local nobility and the church. These differences, which could have complemented each other, degenerated into open conflicts that deeply affected Adelaide. The young Otto II, influenced by his wife, began to distance himself from his mother and dismiss her advice. The breaking point came when Adelaide was practically excluded from the imperial court. This marginalization represented a humiliation difficult to bear, not so much because of wounded pride, but because of the sadness of seeing her ability to serve the common good fade away. She then decided to withdraw from the court and seek refuge in Italy, where she still had allies and properties. During this period of estrangement, Adelaide experienced one of the dark nights of her soul. She had dedicated her entire life to the service of God and the empire, and now she felt rejected precisely by those she loved most. However, this suffering further purified her spirit and stripped her of any attachment to temporal power. Divine providence, which always writes straight with crooked lines, allowed a partial reconciliation before further tragedies. Otto II died prematurely in the year 983, leaving as heir a child of barely 3 years old. The future Otto III, the emperor's death completely transformed the political situation. The empire needed a strong and experienced regency to protect the rights of the small heir and maintain stability during his minority. Theophanu, as the mother of the child emperor, naturally assumed the regency, but recognized that she needed the support and experience of Adelaide to face the enormous challenges ahead. The two women established a kind of co-regency that worked with reasonable harmony for the following years. Adelaide, with her characteristic magnanimity, forgave past offenses and dedicated herself with renewed vigor to ensuring the stability of the empire and the Christian formation of her grandson Otto III. This stage of collaboration demonstrated Adelaide's profound humility. It would have been natural for her to harbor resentment towards Theophanu, but her holiness manifested precisely in her ability to put the common good before any personal grievance. When Theophanu died in 991, Adelaide assumed the regency alone, guiding the empire with a firm but maternal hand until her grandson reached adulthood. These trials had further tempered her soul, preparing her for the final stage of her earthly life. Chapter 8. The Retreat and Contemplative Life. When Otto III reached adulthood and could govern for himself, Adelaide understood that the time had come to retire definitively from political life. She was then over 60 years old, an advanced age for the medieval era, and had dedicated her entire adult existence to the service of the empire. However, her retirement didn't stem from weariness or resignation, but from a deep spiritual longing that had grown in her heart for decades. Adelaide wished to dedicate the years that remained to her exclusively to contemplation, prayer, and preparation for the ultimate encounter with God. Her soul longed for the silence of the cloister after so many years of courtly bustle. The Cells Abbey, which she herself had founded years before, became her final refuge. There, the former Empress stripped her life of all that was superfluous and gave herself to a routine of prayer, penance, and contemplation. She participated in all the divine offices with the Benedictine monks, spent long hours before the Blessed Sacrament, and dedicated daily time to reading the Holy Scriptures and the Church Fathers. The contrast between her present life and her former imperial splendor couldn't be greater. But Adelaide experienced in that monastic simplicity a peace she had never known in the palaces. She had discovered that true wealth resides in intimacy with Christ. During her stay in Cells, Adelaide deepened her practice of corporal and spiritual works of mercy. Although withdrawn from the world, she didn't disregard the needs of the poor who came to the monastery seeking help. With her own hands, she prepared food for the needy, cared for the wounds of the sick, and consoled the afflicted. Her charity knew no limits, nor did it make any distinction of persons. The monks who lived with her were edified by her humility and her spirit of service. That woman who had been an empress behaved like the lowest of servants, literally fulfilling the words of the gospel about serving one's brothers and sisters. Adelaide's contemplative life intensified especially in the practice of penance, aware that even the noblest actions performed during her life had been mixed with human imperfections. She sought to purify her soul through fasting, vigils, and mortification. This wasn't an exaggerated or excessive asceticism, but a spiritual discipline guided by wisdom and discernment. Adelaide understood that holiness requires the crucifixion of the old self, so that the new self configured with Christ may be fully born. Her penance was also reparative. She offered her sacrifices for the peace of the empire, for the conversion of sinners, and for the souls in purgatory. In the silence of her monastic cell, Adelaide reached the heights of contemplative prayer. The testimonies of those who knew her in this final stage describe a transfigured woman whose face shone with an inner light that could only come from intimate contact with God. She had traveled a long spiritual road from that young Burgundian princess to becoming a mystic, dwelling more in heaven than on earth. The Cells monastery benefited immensely from her presence, her very existence a silent sermon on life's true priorities. Saint Adelaide had discovered that beyond earthly crowns, only the crown of sanctity holds eternal value, and she prepared to receive it from the King of Kings. Chapter 9. Spiritual mentor and guide of souls. Though withdrawn from the world, Adelaide's reputation for holiness drew many to Cells, seeking her spiritual counsel and intercession. Nobles and commoners alike, monks and lay people, all came to hear the words of wisdom from this woman, who had experienced both the glories and the sufferings of life. Adelaide welcomed everyone with maternal charity, devoting her time and attention regardless of their social standing. Her spiritual guidance was marked by doctrinal clarity, pastoral compassion, and an ability to discern the movements of the Holy Spirit in each soul. She had learned in the school of suffering and prayer what no book could ever teach. One of Adelaide's most significant spiritual friendships was with St. Majolus of Cluny, the great monastic reformer of his time. Majolus was the abbot of the celebrated Cluny Abbey, the epicenter of a religious renewal that was transforming Europe. Between Adelaide and Majolus existed a deep spiritual harmony, both sharing a burning desire to see holiness flourish in the church and working tirelessly, each from their specific vocation to promote the reform of Christian customs. They wrote to each other regularly, exchanging reflections on the spiritual life and advising each other on important decisions. St. Majolus visited Adelaide several times at Cells, and these visits became true spiritual retreats for both of them. They would converse for hours about the mysteries of faith, about the state of the church, and about the paths to holiness. The abbot of Cluny recognized in Adelaide a true spiritual mentor, whose life experience and contemplative depth greatly enriched his own inner life. For her part, Adelaide found in Majolus a sure guide, who helped her discern the subtle movements of grace in her soul. This holy friendship was a mutual gift from God, and a testament to how contemplative souls recognize and help each other on the path to perfection. Adelaide's spiritual influence also extended to her grandson, Emperor Otto III. The young emperor had been raised by his grandmother in Christian principles from childhood, and always maintained a relationship of deep respect and affection for her, even after assuming rule of the empire. Otto III regularly consulted Adelaide on matters that transcended the merely political and touched the moral and spiritual realm. The elderly Empress became for him a living conscience, constantly reminding him of his Christian duties as a ruler. Thanks to this influence, Otto III developed a profoundly religious vision of his imperial mission, which led him to promote the reform of the Church and to dream of a renovatio imperii, a renewal of the empire under evangelical principles. Adelaide also devoted much time to interceding for the needs of those who came to her. She had become a true intercessor before the throne of God, continually presenting the intentions of the faithful in her prayer. People confided in her about their problems, their illnesses, their family difficulties. And she brought all of this before the Lord with maternal solicitude. The testimonies of her time refer to numerous cases of graces obtained through her intercession, the sick healed, conflicts resolved, unexpected conversions. Adelaide attributed all these graces exclusively to divine mercy, refusing to accept any personal merit. Her humility was as deep as her charity, and both virtues shone with increasing intensity as the end of her earthly pilgrimage drew near. Chapter 10. The Final Years of Holiness. The final years of Saint Adelaide were marked by a progressive intensification of her inner life and by an ever greater detachment from earthly things. Although her health began to weaken due to advanced age, her spirit remained vigorous and her spiritual fervor did not diminish. On the contrary, those who knew her in this final stage testified that she seemed to burn with a divine fire, consuming all that remained purely human within her. Adelaide consciously prepared for the great encounter with the celestial bridegroom, and this preparation permeated every moment of her days. Eucharistic devotion occupied the absolute center of Adelaide's life in these later years. She spent hours in adoration before the Blessed Sacrament, contemplating the mystery of divine love, made present in the consecrated elements. For her, the Eucharist was not simply another sacrament, but the summary of the entire Catholic faith, and the source from which all grace flowed. She received communion daily with dispositions of deep reverence and love, preparing herself carefully through frequent confession and perfect contrition. Each communion was for Adelaide a foretaste of the heavenly banquet that she would soon enjoy in its fullness. Adelaide's Marian devotion also reached its fullness at this stage. From her youth, she had maintained a filial relationship with the Blessed Virgin Mary, whom she considered her mother and protector in all tribulations. Now, in the twilight of her life, she intensified her recourse to Mary, praying the Rosary daily and meditating on the mysteries of the life of Christ and his mother. Adelaide saw in Mary the perfect model of surrender to the divine will and desired to imitate that absolute docility to the Holy Spirit. She trusted fully that the Virgin would accompany her in the transition of death and present her before her Son at the moment of particular judgment. During these final years, Adelaide also experienced the gift of prophecy and the supernatural knowledge of future events. On several occasions, she predicted events that later came to pass with accuracy, although she tried to hide these charisms out of humility. Her union with God had reached such a degree that the Lord communicated heavenly secrets to her and allowed her to see beyond external appearances. However, Adelaide never sought these extraordinary gifts for themselves. For her, they were simply instruments that God used for the good of souls and to confirm her message of conversion and fidelity. Adelaide's charity towards the poor did not diminish even as her physical strength began to fail. While she could rise from her bed, she continued visiting the sick and distributing alms to the needy. When she no longer had the strength to do so personally, she sent others in her name, ensuring that no one who came to her seeking help was left without comfort. She distributed all her personal belongings among the poor and religious institutions, completely stripping herself of any material possession. She wished to depart from this world as she had come, stripped of everything, but rich in faith and in the love of God. This radical poverty was the final seal of a life entirely dedicated to divine service and to the good of her neighbor. Chapter 11. The Passing to Heaven. Towards the end of the year 999, as the turn of the millennium approached, filling all of Christendom with expectation, Adelaide's health worsened considerably. The elderly saint understood that her time to depart from this world was near, and she received this news with the serenity of one who has lived. continually preparing for this moment. Far from frightening her, the prospect of death filled her with holy joy, for it meant the definitive encounter with Christ, whom she had loved and served throughout her life. She asked to receive the last rites of the Church and prepared with meticulous devotion for the great transition. On December 16, 999, a liturgical feast close to Christmas, Adelaide summoned the monks of Cells to her bedside. With a weak but firm voice, she delivered her last words of spiritual exhortation. She reminded them of the importance of fidelity to the monastic rule. She entrusted them to persevere in prayer, and she asked them to continue exercising charity with the poor who came to the monastery. Then, with profound humility, she asked for forgiveness from all for any fault she may have committed and thanked them for the patience they had shown her. Those present, moved to tears, contemplated Adelaide's face, which shone with a supernatural light. After receiving viaticum and extreme unction, Adelaide entered into deep prayer. Although her body was weakened, her spirit remained vigilant and lifted towards celestial realities. Witnesses recount that her lips moved constantly, uttering ejaculatory prayers and orations, especially invocations to the most holy name of Jesus and to the Virgin Mary. At a certain moment, an absolute peace descended upon her, and her face acquired an expression of ineffable joy. Those who were present understood that Adelaide was already contemplating realities that are beyond the veil of death. Her agony, far from being a torment, seemed a sweet transition from time to eternity. Saint Adelaide breathed her last in the early hours of the morning, surrounded by the monastic community who chanted psalms and hymns of the liturgy. Her death was peaceful, like a child's sleep, confirming the words of the psalmist, "Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints." At the moment of her departure, several monks testified to having perceived a very sweet aroma that filled the entire cell, a traditional sign of the sanctity of the deceased. Adelaide's body, although elderly, retained an expression of profound serenity that moved those who contemplated it to devotion. The Church had just received a new intercessor in heaven, and the earth lost one of its most luminous souls. The news of Saint Adelaide's death spread quickly throughout the empire, causing deep sorrow, but also a widespread feeling that a true saint had departed to heaven. Her grandson, Emperor Otto III, who was in Italy, was deeply moved upon receiving the news. He had lost not only his grandmother, but also his spiritual teacher and most beloved advisor. The funeral ceremonies were celebrated with great solemnity. At the monastery of Cells, where she was buried according to her wish, from the first moment her tomb became a place of pilgrimage, where the faithful came to implore her intercession. The numerous miracles that occurred through her mediation confirmed the sanctity of that exceptional woman who had journeyed with unwavering fidelity from the most bitter trials to the highest responsibilities, always keeping her gaze fixed on God. Chapter 12, Prayer to Saint Adelaide. Glorious Saint Adelaide, Empress and humble servant of God, you who traversed the harshest trials with unwavering faith and who, at the height of temporal power, never forgot your celestial vocation. We beseech you to intercede for us before the throne of the divine majesty. Obtain for us the grace to maintain firm our hope in the midst of adversities, following your example of absolute trust in divine providence. Saint Adelaide, model of Christian wives and mothers who knew how to harmonize your family responsibilities with your life of prayer and charity, teach us to order our priorities according to God's plan. Help us to understand that true nobility consists in serving Christ in our brothers and sisters, especially in the poorest and most needy. May your testimony of strength in widowhood console those who have lost their loved ones, reminding them that God does not abandon those who trust in Him, Blessed intercessor, you who were imprisoned for defending justice and who generously forgave those who caused you harm, obtain for us the grace of meekness and of forgiveness of offenses. In a world marked by rancor and revenge, your example of magnanimity shines like a light that dispels the darkness. Help us to overcome evil with good, imitating Christ who from the cross forgave his executioners. Saint Adelaide, protector of the Church and defender of monasteries, pray for the sanctification of the clergy and for the flourishing of religious vocations. Intercede so that the pastors of the Church may imitate your zeal for the reform of customs and your passionate love for the purity of faith. May your memory inspire rulers to exercise authority with justice and mercy, remembering that all power comes from God and must be ordered to the common good. Dear Saint, model of contemplative life in the midst of the world, obtain for us the grace to cultivate a deep interior life without abandoning our daily duties. Teach us to find time for prayer and the Eucharist, sources of all true holiness. May your example of detachment free us from the slavery of riches and earthly vanities, directing our hearts towards eternal goods. Saint Adelaide, a loving mother who watched over the Christian education of her children and grandchildren, protect our families and especially bless the children and young adults who face so many spiritual dangers in our time. Intercede so that parents know how to pass on the Catholic faith with both word and example, forming new generations of courageous and generous Christians. Glorious Empress of Heaven, from your celestial home, look down with mercy on our needs. Present before the Lord the intentions we entrust to your maternal intercession. We especially ask you, here you can mention your particular intention. May your powerful mediation obtain for us the necessary graces to persevere on the path of holiness until the end of our days. Saint Adelaide, accompany us at the moment of our death, just as the Virgin Mary accompanied you in your passing. May we not lack the assistance of the sacraments, nor the comfort of Christian hope at that time. Lead us through the valley of shadows to the eternal dwelling places where you already enjoy the beatific vision. Help us to live in such a way that we deserve to join you in the glory of heaven, to praise forever the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.